When daylight bombing over Europe turned into a catastrophe, one aircraft changed the course of the war, the P-51 Mustang. This documentary story reveals how an engineering marvel, born from an urgent British request, became the weapon that gave American airmen back the skies, turned the tide of the air campaign, and became a symbol of victory in the air. At the beginning of World War II, the command of the United States Army Air Forces, USAAF, placed the strategic bet on precision daylight bombing. Unlike the British Royal Air Force, RAF, which switched to night raids after suffering heavy losses, the Americans insisted that daylight would be the key time for airstrikes. The main idea was that thanks to higher accuracy and dense defensive firepower, heavy bombers, primarily the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator, would be able to break through to targets deep in enemy territory and return without the need for fighter escort. This concept, based on the principle of self-defense through mass formation, called for tight combat box formations, where each aircraft covered its neighbors with overlapping fire. Powerful defensive armament, up to 13 machine guns on a B-17, was supposed to provide 360-degree protection against enemy fighter attacks. In theory, this flying fortress could not only shoot down attackers, but also deliver precise strikes on industrial sites, rail junctions, and airfields. However, theory quickly collapsed in the face of harsh reality. By 1943, the Americans had launched massive aerial operations in Europe. The 8th Air Force, based in England, began regular bombing raids on targets inside Germany. The first strikes against France and border regions were relatively successful. But as the missions pushed deeper into the Reich's airspace, the situation rapidly deteriorated. The bombers met organized resistance from the Luftwaffe, particularly from Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf F-190s, often flown by veteran pilots from the Eastern Front. The Germans quickly realized that unescorted Allied bombers could be attacked with minimal risk. Escort fighters, such as the P-47 and P-38, had excellent combat performance, but they lacked the range for deep penetration missions. They could only accompany bombers for a limited portion of the route before turning back, leaving the bomber formations exposed. It was at that moment that German interceptors would strike, inflicting devastating losses. October 1943 marked the turning point. That month, the Americans launched a series of large-scale bombing raids in what became known as Black Week, a campaign aimed at destroying aircraft factories and crippling the Luftwaffe's capabilities. One of the main targets was the industrial city of Schweinfurt, home to ball-bearing factories critical to the German war machine.
October 14, 1943, went down in history as Black Thursday. On that day, 291 B-17 bombers flew to Schweinfurt without full fighter escort. Despite the crew's bravery, the mission turned into a disaster. On the return flight over German territory, the bombers were attacked by hundreds of enemy fighters. In the end, 77 aircraft failed to return, nearly 26% losses. Over 600 men were killed or captured. Many of the remaining bombers were severely damaged and beyond repair. The statistics were terrifying. On average, 1 in 10 crews didn't come back from a mission, and surviving 25 combat sorties, the standard tour, seemed nearly impossible. Morale among airmen plummeted. Young crews realized that with each mission, their odds of survival diminished. They did not hide their fear. One B-17 gunner said after returning from a raid, "This isn't war, it's slaughter. We're like ducks in a shooting gallery." Many barracks had empty bunks. Those who returned watched their friends vanish, replaced by new, equally doomed faces. The command of the 8th Air Force was forced to acknowledge the failure of their previous strategy. In an October 1943 meeting, they decided to temporarily suspend deep raids into Germany except for those that could be sufficiently protected. One senior officer stated plainly, "We cannot afford such losses. We will not go back into Germany until we find a way to protect our bombers all the way to the target and back." It became painfully clear. Precision daylight bombing without continuous fighter escort was suicide. The idea of flying fortresses without fighters had collapsed under Luftwaffe fire. American air strategy stood on the brink of collapse unless a solution could be found. And just when American air power seemed most vulnerable, salvation was already on its way. A new aircraft capable of escorting bombers for the entire length of their missions. That aircraft was the P-51 Mustang, and it would change the rules of the air war over Europe. When fierce air battles were raging over Europe and the American strategy of daylight bombing was hanging by a thread, the decisive role was played by an aircraft that had not even been intended for the U.S. military. The birth of the P-51 Mustang is a story of unexpected technical boldness, daring engineering decisions, and a turning point in the war brought about by a timely innovation. From a British request to an American legend. The story of the Mustang began in 1940 when Britain, in desperate need of modern fighters, approached the American company North American Aviation, NAA, with a request to build the Curtiss P-40 under license. Instead of replicating an aging design, NAA President James Dutch Kindleberger proposed developing an entirely new aircraft that would meet British needs and compete with the latest machines of the Luftwaffe. The project was designated NA-73X, and just 102 days after the contract was signed, a prototype was ready for testing. It was an engineering sensation, a fully developed fighter built in record time during a peak of technological pressure. In October 1940, the aircraft made its first flight. It was initially designated the Mustang Mark I by the British and powered by the American Allison V-1710 engine. The British welcomed the new plane and began operational testing. However, a critical weakness soon became clear. The Allison engine did not provide enough power at high altitude, which greatly limited the aircraft's effectiveness in European combat.
An engineering revolution, aerodynamics, and efficiency. Despite the engine problem, the Mustang's design earned respect. Its aerodynamics were exceptional, literally and figuratively. The aircraft featured a novel laminar flow wing profile, one of the first to be widely used in production aviation. Unlike conventional wings, where the thickest part was in the front third, the laminar wing shifted this point closer to the center, reducing turbulence and drag. This allowed for a speed increase of up to 20 miles per hour with the same engine power, an invaluable advantage in combat. The cooling system also deserved special mention. The belly-mounted air scoop not only cooled the engine, but used the Meredith effect, a phenomenon where heated air from the radiator generated additional thrust. Even the cooling system contributed to the plane's overall performance. The Mustang also stood out for its precise control balance and high-speed stability. Pilots praised its smooth, silken response to controls, especially in medium and high speeds. In maneuverability, it surpassed most enemy fighters, particularly at altitude. The game changer, Rolls-Royce Merlin. The decisive turning point in the Mustang story was the decision to equip it with the British Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. In 1942, RAF engineers conducted trials replacing the Allison engine with the renowned V-12 Merlin, the same engine used in the Spitfire and Lancaster. The results were astonishing. Power, speed, and ceiling all increased dramatically, transforming the Mustang into a potential world beater. Production of the Merlin was soon licensed in the U.S. and began at Packard plants. The P-51B and its twin-built Dallas version, the P-51C, became the first production Mustangs equipped with the Merlin. These aircraft could reach speeds over 430 miles per hour above 25,000 feet, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the earlier Allison-powered versions. The Merlin engine made the Mustang a true long-range escort fighter. From that point on, it could not only fly alongside bombers, but dogfight with the best aircraft of the Luftwaffe at high altitudes, offering both superior speed and firepower. Technical characteristics: range, speed, and armament. One of the key reasons for the Mustang's success was its extraordinary range. Thanks to large internal tanks and drop tanks, it could cover distances of up to 1,300 miles. This made it possible to escort bombers across the entire mission route, from bases in England to Berlin and back. Unlike the P-47, which had to turn back after 150 to 200 miles, the Mustang stayed with the bombers to the very end. The Mustang also outperformed rivals in speed. With the Merlin engine, it could reach speeds over 430 miles per hour, or about 690 kilometers per hour at high altitude. Its maneuverability and aerodynamic refinement gave it a distinct edge in duels with the Bf-1109 and the FW-190.
Its armament included 6.50 caliber, 12.7 millimeter Browning M2 machine guns in the P-51D variant, providing dense and devastating firepower. Earlier B/C variants had 4 guns, still more than adequate for engaging fighters and ground targets. Mustang versus P-47 and P-38. Decisive superiority. Before the Mustang's arrival, the main U.S. escort fighters were the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning. Both had strengths. The Thunderbolt featured heavy armor and firepower, while the Lightning's twin boom design offered good high-speed stability. However, both suffered from limited range. Even with drop tanks, the P-47 could only escort bombers to the edges of Germany. The P-38, despite its range, faced serious maintenance challenges and struggled in the cold, high-altitude conditions of Europe. The Mustang combined all the key attributes: speed, range, maneuverability, firepower, and ease of maintenance. It wasn't just better, it was essential. It gave bombers the ability to strike deep into Germany again after the disaster of Black Thursday. When the Mustang was deployed en masse to Europe in early 1944, everything changed. It became not only a shield for the bombers, but a spear striking directly into the heart of the Luftwaffe. German fighter aces were stunned. Now American fighters pursued them not just over the front, but over their own airfields. The P-51 Mustang had become the symbol of the approaching collapse of the Third Reich's air power. When the first P-51 Mustang fighters appeared in the skies over Germany in December 1943, American bomber crews did not yet realize that salvation had arrived on the horizon. These sleek, single-engine aircraft flew alongside the massive B-17s and B-24s, protecting them from Luftwaffe fighters. Soldiers quickly gave their new allies an affectionate nickname: Little Friends. It was born out of respect and sincere gratitude. The once vulnerable flying fortresses now had loyal companions ready to shield them with their lives. First combat missions. Mustang enters the fight. In December 1943, the 354th Fighter Group, assigned to the 9th Air Force, became the first to deploy the Mustang in combat over Europe. It set the standard for future escort strategy. From its earliest sorties, the Mustang proved its versatility. It wasn't just an appendage to bomber formations, but a true hunter, capable of intercepting German fighters before they could reach their targets. In January 1944, a pilot from that group, Lieutenant Colonel James Howard, single-handedly fought off dozens of German aircraft while defending a formation of B-17s. His actions became legendary and earned him the Medal of Honor. The message was clear. The Mustang hadn't just arrived, it had come to change the course of the air war. But the real transformation came with the appointment of General James "Jimmy" Doolittle as the new commander of the 8th Air Force.
Doolittle's new doctrine: hunters instead of bodyguards. Before 1944, U.S. doctrine dictated that escort fighters remain glued to bomber formations, guarding them from attack. This prevented fighters from chasing the enemy and cost them tactical initiative. Doolittle, an experienced pilot and strategist, changed everything. From January 1944 onward, the Mustang was given a new role, not just to protect, but to actively seek and destroy the enemy. Escorts were no longer limited to flying alongside bombers. Mustangs now swept ahead to attack German fighters before they could form up. For the first time, Allied fighters were setting the terms of engagement. German pilots, used to striking bombers with impunity, were now met with resistance on approach. Moreover, once bombing missions were complete, Mustang pilots were ordered not to return home immediately, but to attack enemy airfields, transport convoys, locomotives, depots, and even barracks. This aggressive strategy rapidly drained the Luftwaffe's strength and disrupted supply lines. The hunt had begun. Big Week, turning the tide in the skies. In February 1944, the Allies launched a massive campaign known as Operation Argument, better known as Big Week. From February 20th to 25th, thousands of bombers and fighters launched daily attacks on Germany's aircraft factories in cities like Schweinfurt, Leipzig, Augsburg, and Rostock. The goal was not just to destroy factories, but to lure the Luftwaffe into the air and break it. Mustangs played a crucial role. They led bomber formations deep into enemy territory, then engaged interceptors, often preemptively. Hundreds of German aircraft were shot down. Allied losses were heavy, but they were now mutual, no longer a one-sided slaughter. By the end of Big Week, the Allies had eliminated a large portion of Germany's trained pilots. And while Germany could still build new planes, it could no longer replace its lost airmen. Cracks began to form in the once impenetrable shield of the Luftwaffe. Psychological shift, fear and hope. The appearance of the Mustang brought not only tactical success, but also a profound psychological impact. Bomber crews began to feel, for the first time, that they had a chance of making it home. Where each mission had once felt like a one-way trip, they now knew their little friends were waiting, meeting them in the sky, escorting them back. Even new recruits felt emboldened. On the enemy side, the effect was the opposite. German aces, accustomed to striking unopposed, now faced serious resistance. The Mustang attacked from below, above the flanks. It was fast, agile, and, most demoralizing of all, It chased them to their own airfields. Some German pilots admitted after the war that for the first time they felt like prey. One confessed, "They were everywhere. We no longer ruled the skies. We were hiding over our own country." Mustang pilots, by contrast, felt energized. No longer bound to rigid bomber paths, they became aggressive, confident, and mobile. A new rhythm emerged over Europe, one where the Allies held the initiative.
Mustangs over Berlin, a symbol of change. On March 6, 1944, the first daylight raid on Berlin took place. Over 800 bombers and nearly 900 escort fighters, including large numbers of P-51s, flew toward the heart of the Third Reich. German commanders were stunned. American fighters were circling above their capital, something unthinkable just weeks earlier. Losses on both sides were significant, but the symbolic victory was overwhelming. Mustangs were over Berlin. That meant the airspace of Germany no longer belonged to Germany. The event gave rise to one of the most quoted lines of the war. Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, is said to have declared, "If American fighters could appear over Berlin, we have lost the war." The enemy's own words remain the clearest testimony to how pivotal the Mustang had become. Spring 1944 marked a radical turning point in the air war over Europe. What had seemed impossible just 6 months earlier had now become reality. The Allied air forces were gradually and relentlessly pushing the Luftwaffe out of the skies over the Third Reich itself. At the center of this shift was the P-51 Mustang, a fighter that evolved from a technical innovation into a strategic weapon, delivering decisive air superiority. Widespread deployment of the Mustang, reshaping the fighter landscape. Following its successful debut in late 1943 and impressive performance in February-March 1944, the U.S. Air Force Command made a strategic decision to rapidly ramp up production and deployment of the Mustang in the European theater. By the summer of 1944, the Mustang had become the primary escort fighter in the 8th and 15th Air Forces. It gradually replaced the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning, leaving those aircraft to secondary or tactical roles. The reasons were obvious. The Mustang had greater range, better fuel efficiency, high speed, and superior high-altitude maneuverability. It could escort bombers all the way across Germany, deep into Eastern Europe, Poland, and even as far as the borders of Czechoslovakia. Most importantly, it could engage the Luftwaffe's best fighters on equal terms and win. Reorganization moved quickly. In the first half of 1944, nearly all escort fighter brooks were re-equipped with the Mustang. By year-end, the Mustang formed the backbone of American fighter strength in Europe. With that, the very nature of the air war changed, from defense to aggressive offense. The Mustang wasn't just shielding bombers anymore, it was hunting. German skies no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. Loss of veterans. Collapse of the Luftwaffe's pilot corps. The Luftwaffe's early advantage lay not just in its aircraft, but in its elite pilots. They were rigorously trained and had real combat experience from Spain, Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. But by 1943, Germany began losing its veteran flyers. With the Mustang's entry into combat and the shift in American tactics, German aces found themselves facing a new and unfamiliar reality. They were now the targets. Many of the Luftwaffe's top pilots were killed in the fierce air battles of 1944. February and March were especially devastating, with Operation Big Week and follow-up raids decimating squadrons.
Their replacements were poorly trained recruits rushed through an overstressed training pipeline. These green pilots were sent into battle after crash courses with little chance of surviving encounters with battle-hardened Allied flyers. Losses soared, morale plummeted, and the Luftwaffe's ability to resist steadily deteriorated. A systematic breakdown was underway.
Mustangs and D-Day, winning the skies over Normandy. On June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious invasion in history began, the D-Day landings in Normandy. Success depended not only on sea and ground operations, but critically on control of the skies. Allied commanders knew that if the Luftwaffe could strike transport convoys or landing forces, the entire operation could collapse. This is where the Mustang proved decisive. By early June, the Allies held overwhelming air superiority. P-51s and other escort fighters continuously patrolled the skies over France. They destroyed German planes on takeoff, attacked reinforcement trains, suppressed flak batteries, and terrorized enemy logistics. Ironically, on D-Day itself, the Luftwaffe barely showed up. Most aircraft were either shot down en route or destroyed on the ground. General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had told his troops before the invasion, "If you see aircraft overhead, they'll be ours." That promise was made possible by the Mustang, which ensured not just air presence, but total air dominance. The round-the-clock war. RAF by night, USAAF by day. One of the Allies' key strategic concepts was to maintain constant pressure on Germany. This became known as the round-the-clock war. RAF bombers struck at night, while USAAF forces hit during the day. But without reliable fighter escorts, the American daylight campaign had been limited. With the arrival of the Mustang, the situation changed. The U.S. could now attack by day with both precision and protection. RAF bombers would shatter cities and infrastructure in darkness, while USAAF missions targeted factories, oil depots, and rail hubs in broad daylight. Germany became the focus of relentless air assault. No pause, no recovery. In this Allied partnership, the Mustang was the bow in the archer's hand, tying together British and American efforts into a cohesive, coordinated offensive. The enemy could no longer hide by night or day. Germany's ability to mobilize, transport, or even store its resources collapsed under constant air attacks. Erosion of German defenses and decline in Allied losses. Before the Mustang, flying a bombing mission into Germany was nearly a death sentence. Loss rates per raid reached 20 to 30%. But by spring 1944, the statistics were changing dramatically. Now full bomber squadrons returned intact. Losses dropped to manageable levels, missions became effective, and morale stabilized. Meanwhile, German defenses unraveled. Beyond pilot shortages, anti-aircraft capabilities crumbled. Airfields, depots, workshops, and supply routes came under constant attack. The Mustang, patrolling the skies, shot down recon planes, disrupted logistics, and prevented troop movements. Its versatility, from dogfights to ground strikes, made it an indispensable tool of suppression.
By mid-1944, Allied forces were destroying an estimated 500 to 700 Luftwaffe aircraft per month, while dramatically reducing their own losses. This became a vital component of the broader Western Front campaign. Without the Mustang, there would have been no air supremacy, no secure logistics, and no confident offensive momentum. By the end of World War II, the name Mustang had become nearly synonymous with Allied air superiority. This aircraft was not only a technological breakthrough and a decisive tool for winning the air war, but it also redefined strategic thinking. Victory could be achieved not just on the ground, but also in the sky. The legacy of the Mustang extends far beyond 1944, reflected in the words of veterans, historians, engineers, and in the very structure of post-war military doctrine. Reflections from Veterans and Historians, from Bud Anderson to Adolf Galland. Many veterans who flew the P-51 Mustang spoke of it decades later with admiration, affection, and even reverence. One of the most well-known pilots was Clarence Bud Anderson, a triple ace with over 100 combat missions. In his memoirs, he called the Mustang the finest piston-engine fighter of the war, emphasizing its balance. It was the perfect combination of power, range, maneuverability, and firepower. We flew with confidence that we could make it home. From the other side of the front, similar praise came from those who had fought against the Mustang. One such voice was Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, an ace credited with more than 100 kills. After the war, reflecting on the air campaign, he stated plainly, "From the moment the P-51 Mustang arrived, we began to lose control of the skies." That was the turning point. Galland noted that the Mustang robbed the Luftwaffe of freedom of movement, forcing German pilots to operate under constant threat. Historians, including leading experts like Richard Overy, James Holland, and Donald Miller, largely agree that only with the arrival of the Mustang did the daylight bombing strategy become both realistic and effective. Without it, the Allies could not have maintained air superiority, and without that, they could not have methodically crippled Germany's industrial base. A technological and tactical breakthrough. The Mustang wasn't just a successful aircraft. It was the symbol of a new era in military aviation. Its arrival marked the final shift from pinpoint tactical raids to the strategy of sustained, overwhelming pressure. Thanks to its range and versatility, it fulfilled a variety of missions: escort, interception, ground attack, patrol. It could dogfight enemy fighters, destroy trains, defend airfields, and perform reconnaissance. It was a machine that could adapt to any mission.
From an engineering perspective, it represented the best design practices of its time. A laminar flow wing, clean aerodynamic lines, the Meredith effect cooling system, and an optimal power-to-weight ratio. Combined with the Merlin engine, it delivered everything: speed, altitude performance, endurance, and survivability. Tactically, the Mustang changed how fighter aircraft were used in combat. Whereas fighters had previously been tied to specific roles: base defense, ground attack, bomber interception, the Mustang demonstrated that one aircraft could perform multiple functions in a single mission. It was the first to prove that versatility and range were just as critical as speed and firepower. The Pacific and Korea. Mustang beyond Europe. Although the Mustang is most famous for its role in Europe, its combat career didn't end in Germany. In 1945, following the capture of bases in the Mariana Islands, including Iwo Jima, Mustangs began escorting B-29 superfortresses on long-range missions against Japan. These missions stretched up to 1,500 miles, once again confirming the P-51's exceptional capabilities. After World War II, the Mustang did not fade into obscurity. In the early Cold War years, as jet aircraft remained in limited supply, the P-51, redesignated F-51, became a temporary backbone of the U.S. Air Force. It saw extensive combat during the Korean War, 1950 to 1953, serving as a ground attack platform and close air support fighter. Its high cost effectiveness, easy maintenance, and availability in large numbers made it indispensable in the early months of the conflict. At the same time, the Mustang was exported to dozens of countries and continued to serve in military roles through the 1980s. It was used across Latin America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and even parts of Europe, making it one of the longest-serving fighters of its generation. The Mustang is a cultural and wartime icon. The P-51 became one of the most enduring symbols of World War II. Its silhouette is instantly recognizable, and the name Mustang is forever associated with boldness, speed, and strength. It features prominently in films, books, comics, and museums. Restored Mustangs are proudly displayed at air shows, maintained in pristine condition in private collections, and mounted on pedestals as monuments to aviation history. Veterans who flew the Mustang often described it as an aircraft that took care of you. Even decades later, many still consider it the best propeller-driven fighter ever built. It came to symbolize both engineering brilliance and wartime bravery. And its contribution to victory was not just technical, it was profoundly moral. Without the Mustang, there would have been no daylight victory. If one had to summarize the impact of the Mustang in a single sentence, it would be this: without it, the daylight bombing strategy would have failed. The Mustang was not more than an escort. It was the shield and sword of the air war. Its range enabled deep strikes anywhere in the Reich. Its speed and firepower turned the tide in favor of the Allies. Its versatility enabled it to respond to almost any challenge. It was the vital link between tactics and strategy, between mission and success, between life and death for thousands of American and British airmen.
The Mustang didn't just save lives, it shortened the war. According to many historians, without it, the air campaign might have dragged on for another year, and the Normandy landings could have been jeopardized. It changed the equation of war in the Allies' favor and proved, once and for all, air superiority decides the fate of battles on land and sea.